Imagine being able to change something in your reality. Perceptive AI is essentially the next evolution from thinking about intelligence in an artificial way to now thinking about perception in an artificial way. How do we now elevate the technology AI from a thinking state into a feeling state? But just because we can capture your emotional state doesn't mean everybody should have access to that. Our relationship with the technology will change profoundly.
Hi everyone, welcome to ATxEnterprise Tech Unpacked. Now, for years, the enterprise tech conversation has been dominated by thinking AI, LLMs, and generative models, and process logic and language. But we are now crossing a new threshold. AI that not only thinks, but could smell, taste, and feel, and perhaps even interpret human emotion. So what does that mean for our work, our businesses, and our relationships with our machines? Joining us on Tech Unpacked, we have the author of Perceptive Machines, Professor Rocky Scopelliti. Welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
Now, I'm going to go straight into it, right? We've spent the last few years scaling thinking AI like LLMs, with perceptive AI, on the other hand, systems that taste, smell, and feel. This changes the entire way that AI's application is going to be for the end user. So what's the take on what perceptive AI is for the audience out there?
Yeah, so perceptive AI is essentially the next evolution from thinking about intelligence in an artificial way to now thinking about perception in an artificial way. And so our ability to digitize our senses is really what this next frontier is really all about. Now, what's interesting with perception, however, is that we all see things and interpret reality in completely different ways. And so when it comes to then thinking about that from a synthetic perspective, we shouldn't just assume that machines will also perceive things in exactly the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we look at AI, and again, we're used to LLMs and now agentic, we're assuming that it can think for us, but in actual fact, it's just data sets, right?
Yes.
But now the real question is, I really like to understand a little bit more in how AI is now able to see, think, feel.
Yeah. So if we think about our senses, sight, sound, taste, touch, most of our digital existence so far has really focused on digitizing sight and sound. But biological sight and sound, from a human perspective, has its limitations. But what's interesting is we have other biological species that can see far beyond our sight. Eagles, for example, can see much further than what humans can. Dogs can hear frequencies that humans simply can't. Cats can sense movement that humans can't. And so even within biological senses, we have a wide degree of variation between different species. Now, the question here is then, when it comes to artificial perception, how is this going to evolve where the limits that we've existed within are no longer there? What happens when, for example, the technology can hear frequencies that we can't hear? How will we know that? When it can taste and experience different things that we can't. And so this is why it's very important that this next evolution of technology be developed in a controlled manner, because we're already starting to see examples of where artificial intelligence is developing languages on their own that we don't understand. So it's about coexisting with other agents that have a sensory capability like we have biologically.
Oh, that's really interesting. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole discussion of sentience because that's going to be a whole different podcast
It
altogether,
is.
right? But I think what's more interesting here as well, and more relevant to our audience, is what do you think these applications are going to be? Like, I'm not even going to go into the tech stack of how machines are able to smell and even feel, right? But more importantly, what are the applications when this actually comes up?
If you look at some of the major developments that are going on right now, we have brain-computer interfaces that
Like
are now
Neuralink.
Neuralink, precisely, that are already being able to adapt and recreate experiences that might have been lost according to the patient and the condition and the like. Healthcare is a fantastic area to think about the use cases, because when we think about diagnostics, for example, our breath can reveal, many diagnostic areas that our traditional forms of diagnosis simply can't. And so when we kind of think about this from a diagnostic perspective, it'll open up completely new ways of being able to detect illnesses much earlier on in their development or evolution than what we have today. I think the other really exciting area, of course, is the use of these kinds of technologies to extend limitations that some people may have today. Hearing, for example, to be able to give high quality hearing to someone who's either lost their hearing or was born with a deficiency in that area. Sight, to be able to provide sight to those that have lost their biological seeing capability. I think all of those things in a healthcare are absolutely wonderful. And I think in another area that's also quite interesting is in the area of sensory surveillance. And what I mean by that is that when we fly into a country, we are typically analyzed from a biometric perspective, whether that's facial, fingerprint, voice, many different biometrics. But this technology takes it a couple of steps further, because it can analyze actually how you're feeling when you get off the plane, and it can alert customs and immigration about higher than usual stress levels, for example, in individuals. So it offers a completely different way of assessing risk at a customs and immigration level compared to the methods and the forms that we use today.
That's very interesting. When you talk about that in terms of security, I think that would be a very interesting integration, because the technology is not new. Blood pressure sensors, you've got skin temperature,
Yeah.
you even have micro expression, facial expression, or facial analysis.
Sight.
Is all there. So you're saying that with Perceptive AI, that brings it all together into almost what a brain is able to do with all the 5 senses now.
Yeah, it can present a profile of an individual beyond just confirming that biometrically that this individual is who is being presented on the passport. It can detect, again, emotions and different sensory conditions going on with an individual, which might, alert customs and immigration that they might want to look a little bit further at particular individuals that might come through. Wide degree.
Paint the whole doom and gloom picture, right? Skynet, so on and so forth. I do want to understand, though, if machines are going to start perceiving things for us, that in itself also is going to challenge our own perceptions. If you think about it, as a futurologist, you probably see this not just 5-10 years down the road, but imagine generations beyond. How does that then change, number one, our perception, because it will alter that? And secondly, what's that change in that relationship between people and the technology?
Yeah, that is the number one question, because in many respects, once we can digitize our senses, the question then invites us to consider, how do we program our reality? Now, what's interesting is you can have two or more different people who could be looking at something and see it in a completely different way. You might have been out with friends who, are tasting and having sensations that you may not be having, or hearing noises that you may not. And that's because perception is how we are interpreting information that is coming into our senses, and it's not universal. And so when it comes to then thinking about how this coexists between machines and humans, a machine's view of reality versus our own view of reality may not be the same. We see things, they calculate probabilities. We see objects, they calculate the probability that that's a camera. So they're using data and a whole range of different ways to determine or label a particular thing, which is so synthetic perception is very, very different from biological perception. But when these two come together, imagine being able to change something in your reality. So, walking around this wonderful conference, for example, imagine if you could edit out all of the background noise, for example, and edit back in some nice, comforting background music to walk around. All of these things change your reality. But as soon as sensors become programmable, then all of a sudden we can start editing what is in our reality and how we interpret it versus the limitations.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, from a media perspective, that also means that everybody is going to have to be even more wary of what they actually get to see now. Because,
Yes.
I mean, with deepfakes that are so accurate now, with Gen AI models that are creating video and images that are hyper realistic, to the point whereby it's really that close. I can't imagine what that future is going to be like, whereby AI is able to perceive. And if AI perceives, then it could potentially develop a model or process to convince, because it understands our behavior, our psychology, our psyche. So I cannot imagine what are the guardrails that's going to be put in place for something like that.
And I think that's the point. We have to be able to equip people with the right questions to be asking of our lawmakers around this. And that's one of the features of my book, Perceptive Machines. There's over 140 questions that the book presents to equip people to understand what questions we need to be asking, because everybody should have a point of view on this. We shouldn't just be leaving lawmakers or the for-profit organizations in Silicon Valley, for example, to be completely driving the future of humanity. And so the more informed we can become about the issues, the consequences, the implications, then the stronger the voice that we can have in ensuring that our lawmakers are crafting safe and responsible development of this technology.
I love that point, because here we are at ATxEnterprise and there's an entire community of practitioners. I think there should be a plea for everybody here who is in the CIO, CTO level to actually get some skin in the game, to have some influence over this. Because if you think about it, we passed the Industrial Revolution, we had so many different pandemics, so on and so forth. But moving into perceptive AI, I think we might just go into the age of discernment.
Yes, that's right. Because, as you mentioned before, this technology now is so good as it is that it becomes indistinguishable from reality. And we're seeing this playing out in a lot of the, the avatars and what AI can do in, originating content. So once this starts evolving into this perceptual area, this is when it really starts coming to life. And that's where we do need to have things like data controls in place. Just because we can capture your emotional state, it doesn't mean everybody should have access to that. So we've got to rethink our privacy, our data protections, as more and more of our own biological data becomes capturable, storable, and actionable.
How far away do you think we are from this age of perceptive AI?
I think we're already there. We've been quite advanced in the area of hearing for quite a long time. The cochlear implant that was developed in Australia, in fact, gave hearing to so many people who had lost their hearing over the years. We're seeing prosthetics now. We're seeing, robotic arms that are being moved by brain waves rather than through, muscular attachments and the like. So we are right at the beginning of this journey, but it's moving very, very fast, very fast.
Wow. Okay. So that being said, there has to be a sense of urgency here. Now, I'd like to get your take on this. What should boards, CIOs, and technology leaders be doing now to prepare for this next evolution of AI?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is get ready to adapt. And I think, a lot of organizations have struggled to just catch up with artificial intelligence. And I'm sure that they'll reach a point where there'll be a level of confidence, but this thing's going to take it even further. Their data privacy policies will need adjustments in this area. There'll be all sorts of lifestyle processes that will need customer consents in completely different ways. So I think the preparing for a world that is in accelerated change is the best thing any leader can do in an organization. A lot of these things are quite speculative, no doubt, but when they do occur, they're going to occur just like with large language models very quickly.
Right. So that's going to be two parts of it. One is definitely in terms of the guardrails, policies, and of course, please work with the lawmakers. I think that's really important, right?
Correct.
To get policies on there and be proactive to work with the government for that. The other side of it is I'm going to put the business hat on and go, think about it as the opportunity for the next level of customer engagement, healthcare, patient care, so on and so forth. So that is also going to be the next evolution of customer facing.
Yes.
And customer experiences, I think.
Yes.
So now moving that forward, I'd love to close off with this. If there's one idea that you want the ATx Enterprise or ATx Singapore audience to take away about perceptive AI, what would it be?
Well, to embrace it. We have come so far in thinking about artificial intelligence or thinking about intelligence artificially. The next major wave is also now going to be about thinking about perception, but in a artificial way. And so it's how do we now elevate the technology AI from a thinking state into a feeling state? And our relationship with the technology will change profoundly as a result of that.
Wow. Lots of insights here. And I think that just completely opens up so many doors about what the future is going to hold. So thank you so much, Professor Rocky, for joining us on the podcast. And now, Professor Rocky, please, camera's yours. Let everybody knows what's happening and how they can get in touch with you.
Pleasure. So my new book, Perceptive Machines, invites you to think about more than 130 questions about the evolution of this technology, again, taking it from thinking about intelligence artificially to thinking about perception artificially and the wonderful world of opportunities for humanity that awaits us.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor. And thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Tech Unpacked by ATxEnterprise. So we'll see you at the next episode of the podcast. Bye, everyone.